Today we are rendering lard. Lard has a lot of uses and not just food-wise. It can be mixed with beeswax and used for furniture polish or to preserve leather, or you can use it to wipe it on your tools to prevent rust. You can even make soap with lard. And you know, lard has gotten a bad rap over the years. And as I was researching for this video, I decided to take a look at why people stopped using lard. It used to be used all the time. Well, it turns out in the early 1900s, Procter and Gamble, who were then candle maker and soap maker, wanted a new way to make money. And so a product called Crisco was born. And Crisco was made out of a waste product from the cotton industry. It was made from cottonseed oil. And they marketed it as healthier than lard, and it was cheaper than lard. It was not actually healthier than lard because by heavily processing the cottonseed, they used a process called hydrogenation, which we know now is not a healthy process. But through clever marketing and the fact that it was cheaper than lard, it fell out of favor with the general public. And so now pork fat is actually considered more of a waste product in the animal industry. Naturally processed lard is actually a healthy fat. So today we're going to be rendering some pork fat. If you do get your animal processed at a meat locker, many times they will give you the pork fat for free. And that's actually what happened to us. We went in with one of my good friends and had and split a hog, had it processed at a meat locker, and they just gave us the pork fat for free. But if you need to purchase pork fat, you can contact your meat locker, and it's a waste product, so it's not expensive. In fact, I called our local locker just to see how much they would charge for pork fat, and it was 75 cents a pound. So that's not bad. Once you've obtained the pork fat, you need to put it in the freezer. Freezing it makes it much easier to process, trust me. You'll want it frozen so that you can either cut it into strips for putting through your meat grinder, or so that you can dice it up pretty small yourself with a knife. You can do it either way. If you don't have a meat grinder, just dice it up. And what you're trying to do there is you're trying to get as much surface area of the fat exposed as possible. And in that way, you will be able to more effectively render out those impurities and the moisture from the fat. The package that I got out of the freezer was very large and heavy, but I'm only using about half of it, and I weighed that out, and I'm rendering about 7.5 pounds of lard today. Now, online it says that for 1 pound of pork fat, you will get about a pint of lard. But I have a friend that renders this, and she says out of 10 pounds of pork fat, she gets about 7 or so pints of lard. So we'll be testing that out today. So here I'm just running it through the meat grinder attachment that goes on my mixer, and I'm using just the coarse grind plate because we just want to get some surface area on our fat. Today I'm going to be processing the lard in a couple crock pots. There's actually a couple of different ways that you can do it. The low temperature I read online for a crock pot is around 190 degrees. You want somewhere between 180 to 200 degrees. So you want a low heat because you want to melt it. You don't want to cook it. If it starts to cook or stick to the sides or anything like that, you're going to get a more porky flavor. And sometimes that's desirable. It just depends on how you're planning on using it. Now, if you don't want to render it in a crock pot, You can also render it in the oven. You can put it in a really heavy pot, maybe like a Dutch oven, and put it in the oven on a low temperature setting. Like I said, somewhere between 180 and 200. You don't want to cook it. You can also do it on top of the stove. You can set your burner down to maybe 2 to get it started, and then quick put it down to 1, and just let it render on top of the stove. But no matter how you do it, you want to leave the lid off. You don't want to put a lid on it. We're trying to get rid of the moisture, and we're trying to get rid of the impurities, so we want that evaporating up and out of the pork fat. So I actually ended up with 2 crock pots going here, my newer one and my old one, both set to low, and I've set them for 6 hours because I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take to render, but I'll be stirring these fairly frequently whenever I walk through the kitchen. So we're just going to let this go on low for however long it takes. Okay, we are 1 hour in, and you can see it's melting nicely. Give it a little stir so it doesn't cook or burn on the sides or the bottom. Moving along nicely. If you want the best lard for things like baking, you will need to ask for or get the leaf lard, it's called. And that's the fat from around in the abdominal cavity, around the organs, mainly around the kidneys. That will give you the most pure fat with the least amount of porky taste for things like baked goods. However, you can render any of the fat from a pig. And if you do it correctly and don't let it actually cook, just melt and not cook, it really won't have that much of a porky flavor at all, and you can use it in any cooking. Here we are at about 2 hours in, a little over 2 hours. You can see it's melting nicely, and what I'm going to do now that this has melted down some is I'm going to merge this one over here with my other one. So what is actually happening when you render pork fat is that you are taking out any excess moisture, any water, any impurities, and you're left with a pure fat. And this is important because it's excess moisture and impurities that will make your lard go rancid. Now, if it does go rancid, there are still uses for it. You can still use it for that furniture polish. You can still use it for your tools. You can still use it to make soap. So don't throw it out. So here we are at about 3 hours. You can see a lot of stuff has settled to the bottom. It looks like it's still rendering. So we're just going to give it a stir and let it keep going. 4 hours, not a lot of change, but I am noticing a little bit of bubbling, so I'm going to stir it more often now. While our fat is melting, I'm going to prepare some pint jars. We want these to be warm when we put the fat in because we don't want to crack our jars. And of course, we're going to need some seals and also some rings. And I'm just going to put these in a low oven, like a 175, however low your oven goes. I'm just going to put those in the oven and leave them there until we're ready. This has been rendering for about 10 hours now. I do see some bits that are now starting to float at the top. So we are going to go ahead and ladle this through some cheesecloth and into our jars. This is pure fat. So we do not have to water bath can this or pressure can it, anything like that. What we're going to do is just put the hot lard into our jars, leave about a 1/2 inch or so of headspace, Then we're going to put some clean seals on there and rings, and we're going to let them self-seal. Now this process is not a safe process if you're canning something else, because the whole idea of processing something that's canned is to kill any bacteria or anything like that that are in the food. So this would not be a safe process for anything else, but since this is pure lard, it works. It's going to have a little bit of a yellow maybe coloring to it when you put it in the jar, but as it cools and hardens, it will become more of a white color. Now I'm going to store our jars of lard just in a cool, dark location. It will keep for 6 months to a year that way. If you are concerned that it might not keep, you can keep it in the refrigerator or even the freezer. Well, I ended up with almost 7 pints of lard. So I rendered 7.5 pounds of fat. That is approximately 1 pint per pound, less than, but approximately 1 pint per pound. We're going to do a consistency check with this one. This one it didn't seal because of course it's not full enough. It did not seal. The rest of them did seal, so those will be shelf stable. But let's just check. And looks like some good consistency. Will be perfect for baking or whatever I need to use it for. With so many great uses for lard, why wouldn't you try to render your own? It is so easy. So will you be going back in history to the old days and using lard again? Let us know in the comments. And if you got any value from this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. We would really appreciate it. Have an excellent week, and we'll see you next time.